All right, so today we have the Nutrition Roundtable with Jacob Schepis, myself, and Steve Hall. Part one is going to be on this channel. Part two is going to be on Jacob's channel, as the other roundtable was. So when you finish up here, make sure to go to his channel and check out part two.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hall. Obviously not Steve Hall. I'm Dave Maconi from Brains and Gains. We have Steve Hall from Revive Stronger here and Jacob Schepis from JPS Health and Fitness. So we did a roundtable a little while ago talking about coaching, and we thought it'd be cool to have a second one. We got some positive feedback, and so we wanted to have one today on nutrition, and then we thought maybe we'll do a third one in the future on training. So welcome, guys.
Good to be here.
Yeah, man. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us on.
So the first thing we want to talk about was, all the clients we work with setting up their nutrition. A lot of times people come and they really just want nutrition or they want training. Obviously, they're both important, but we have to address the diet. So how do we get started with that? Steve, you want to start?
Yeah, cool. So for me, fortunately, now kind of been coaching for a longer period of time, the people coming for coaching are quite kind of clued up, for kind of lack of a better term. But I still always make sure to have kind of a screening process, which I think is probably what every coach should probably have, where I have a consultation with the individual, or a coach at Revive will have a consultation with the person. And it'll be a case of just asking kind of what is their nutrition looking like? What's it looked like over the years? What they found has been kind of things that have helped them, what's hindered them, what's their understanding, how kind of advanced are they with kind of supplementation, with nutrient timing, with all of these different elements. And we kind of figure out how deep do we want to dig, first of all, and kind of start where they're at. So if they're just basic macro tracking, we can start there, giving them kind of protein targets, calorie targets, potentially, if that's something they want to work with. A lot of the time, it seems like tracking macros was like the thing, and then it seems to have been turned on its head, where it's almost like if you're tracking, you're a freak and like really obsessed. It's difficult, but for an online coach where your kind of results are driven by a lot of data and you are trying to get someone results in quite an immediate period of time, tracking is almost kind of essential to that, so you really know where you're going. Some people don't need that level, but a lot of the people that come to Revive Stronger are very kind of serious about what they're trying to achieve and what they're doing, and they're willing to put that effort in. So we very much do go down mostly of a tracking element of whether or not it's just protein, calories, protein, carbs, fat and fiber. But it's just finding where they're at and then taking them as far within that kind of scenario as they need to go, utilizing ranges within most of these typically, and then kind of moving forward with that. And something I do with a lot of them is take them through kind of what's a typical day look like for them, in terms of they kind of show me their foods they're eating, typical kind of when are they eating them, what sort of times are they eating them, and then I'll kind of go through that and be like, maybe we want to move this bit of protein here to kind of optimize MPS a little bit. Maybe we want to structure a bit more carbohydrates around your workout. That might be something you find helpful. Things like this, just to kind of see if there's small things we can do to tweak their current thing that they're enjoying to make it fit with them a little bit better. And maybe food selection as well, making sure they've got kind of, if they're hitting their fiber, they're probably getting sufficient fruit and vegetables, but potentially looking at those as well. But it's very much, for us, we're fortunate that people are really serious about what they're trying to achieve. And so most of the clients we have are doing some element of tracking. And I have got some who are doing more intuitive, or will use that at some points in their kind of time with us, where they will more so just go to hunger cues, more habitual kind of going for protein and things. But I know when I first started and we had people coming on, there was people I'd struggle, because like tracking was like a big thing for me as a coach. I didn't really understand different ways of doing it, but I did the precision nutrition kind of course and qualification, and they were very much like fists of protein, like thumbs of fat and things like this. So I did end up utilizing that with some clients to a decent success as well. And then on a rare occasion, I will use a meal plan, but I won't set it, they set it, and then I'll be like, I'll confirm it, and then they can follow that. And that might be the final weeks leading into like a contest prep, or it might be for someone who is super duper busy and they just need some kind of structure and routine, and I'm like, you need to set a meal plan, go away and do it. So those are some of the ways we do it, kind of the initial screening, and then meeting them where they're at and taking them to an advancement that is going to get them the best results for them individually, at least.
Sure. And it's interesting you're talking about like the ranges, and I'm thinking you meant like macro ranges in terms of like grams. But what's funny, I don't know if you guys remember, probably macros have been like really big the last like maybe 5 or so years, maybe 5-10 years. But when I was first getting into this, it was all about percentages, and people rarely talked about like specific grams or everything. It was 40% carbs, this much percent protein. It was always percentages, and I'm glad to see that that's kind of changed, because really, I mean, unless you're talking about maybe like ketogenic, where it really does actually matter the percentage that's coming from fat versus protein and carbs. Really, the body doesn't recognize percentages; it recognizes the grams of the total amount of fuel that you're getting. And for me, certainly agree with everything you said there. One of the things that I notice, and there's certainly a lot of data on this now, is how bad people are with their nutrition and tracking things when they first come to you. Even some of the people who've been doing this for a while, I think there was one study showing obese women, they were asking them how many calories they thought they were eating, and they thought they were eating around 1,000. And they were actually eating closer to 3,000 calories. So literally, threefold difference. I mean, it's kind of amazing. And you get that a lot. One of the clients I'm training now, he has already done a physique competition. And when I had him, he's never tracked calories really. And when he started tracking, I'm looking at these numbers and I'm like, this does not make any sense. Like, he had like 2,000 calories from oatmeal. And I'm like, dude, I don't think because he was doing like dry weight versus he thought like the wet weight was what he was supposed to be counting. It was just completely off, right? And so you see that all the time. I think one of the initial things I have to work on is just getting people to understand how much they're eating, whether it's way more than they think or way less than they think. Jacob, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, no, I think Steve's pretty much on the money. Obviously, the key difference with my approach is that I'm often afforded the ability to speak to my clients and athletes face to face, and I have more regular in-person contact as an in-person coach, but very much a similar process, starting with a subjective interview, whether it's a Skype or an initial consultation. And this is very much an information gathering process to observe and just gain an understanding of their education around nutrition. Do they know what calories and macros are? Have they had experience weighing, measuring, tracking food, looking at their diet history, what diets they've followed in the past, whether they worked, didn't work, what they liked or didn't like about them, obviously their goals, their lifestyle and their preferences. So just getting a very broad understanding of the person that we're working with. And then generally from there, immediately after that consultation, I'll get them to just start taking a food record for 7 to 10 days before I put together any plan, just to assess how much they're eating, what they're eating, when they're eating it, all these factors, and looking at their body weight changes in response to the diet. Now, if I have a client who I have deemed to be, I guess, unable to record their intake accurately, that is, they have very little experience in recording their food, or they just don't understand what calories and macros are and things like this, I'll still get them to record their intake, but I might give them some targets as well. From there, I guess my approach moving forward after this initial phase is to actually piece together the plan. So working with a lot of physique competitors and powerlifters, diet periodization is equally as important as planning out training phases. So I'll plan out the various phases of their diet over the certain time frames to optimize their physiology and psychology within the confines of their overarching short-term and long-term goals. So first, it's a matter of zooming out, looking at a macro plan. Now, whether or not I actually plan out 12 months of dieting for someone is really context dependent. If I have an athlete who I've been working with for a number of years, is quite consistent, reliable, provides good data, I'll plan out their 12 months. And obviously, the longer we plan out, the more adjustments to the phases there is. But loosely, I'll plan out the macro cycle. So the 12-month plan, taking into consideration things like their target body weight at certain periods, whether it's for strength athletes making weight for a specific weight class, whether it's physique athletes needing to reach a certain body comp on a specific day that aligns with their competitions, taking into account all the key events. So if they're getting married, they're traveling, anything that's happening, like they have uni, all these sorts of things. We put that in the calendar, and then we have the meso plan from there, where we look at the months and how we break down the overarching strategy over the shorter durations, including strategies within the diet to break up the main periods of their diet, which are either going to be energy restriction or energy surplus. So things like diet breaks, maintenance phases, mini cuts, all those sorts of things. Then we start zooming in from there, and I'll look at the microcycle plan. So how do we structure the 7-day period? Is it going to be a linear diet? Are they going to have the same intake from Monday through Sunday? Are they going to have a non-linear strategy where they're undulating their intake across the course of the week, potentially including refeeds on the weekend for either lifestyle purposes? Most people like to eat more calories on the weekends, or for potential physiological benefits if they're a physique competitor, or potentially like roving high days if they're a strength athlete or someone who's interested in their performance in the gym, making sure that they have their high calorie days around their hardest training sessions. And then we start looking at the really granular details from there, such as how can I devise a plan with it for the day, for each day within the week that is going to optimize their adherence. So things like meal timing and frequency, the distribution of their macros across the meals, what foods they choose to eat. Obviously, I work with them in doing this. I don't give specific food recommendations. And then just generally how they want to, structure their calories over the course of the day, whether they want to, fast in the morning if they're in a fat loss phase and they don't really care for breakfast, if they want to bias calories around the workout because they're interested in performance, or they, like enjoying a meal in the evening with their family, and we bias calories towards, later in the day. So yeah, from there, generally speaking, once I have all of this mapped out, I guess very loosely initially, but as I said, the longer I work with someone, the more I'll dial my attention into these things. We start working out, specific calories and macros, and what kind of approach they're going to take with the diet that not only aligns with the overarching phase. So if they're trying to lose fat, that's the goal. We need an approach that's going to allow us to achieve that and make sure that we're managing the metrics necessary and we're measuring appropriately what we need to assess their response to the diet, but also that takes into account their sustainability and the psychological components. So if somebody doesn't really like macro tracking, we can use self-created meal plans. They could use a visual food diary, things like that.
Awesome. So a ton of detail there. And I think, you talked about different phases. One thing we're going to talk about is the specific dieting phases, maybe when somebody's trying to get really lean. But first, I wanted to touch on, you mentioned having the clients talk about frequency and meal timing. So is that something that you guys really focus on and think is important? For me personally, I think I will tell clients it's just really their preference there. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't say just eat one meal a day or something like that. But generally speaking, if a client prefers maybe 3 meals a day versus 6, I've never personally noticed a difference. It seems like the more data we have on the matter, like the more it shows that there isn't too much of a difference as far as frequency and timing, but maybe you guys think differently.
See, I guess for what we do is both me and Pascal are really flexible in that regard. We give some overarching recommendations, like you said there, 3 to 6 meals, spread your protein generally through these, bias your carbohydrates if you can around your workouts, that sort of thing. There is no real prescription there. As you said, the science on nutrition is very obvious to how flexible it can be, and Jacob gave a great overview of all the different things we can utilize and still see great outcomes. And some people will want more precision, other people will need more flexibility, but it's not necessarily saying that one's better than the other. So it's very much for my clients, we give those general kind of guidelines of like 3 to 6 meals, spread your protein through this. It's a good idea to have them kind of evenly through the day, and this sort of thing. And then it's a case of client by client, how serious do you want to dig into this? Some of them are very happy. A lot of the people we work with are coaches themselves, so they know all this stuff, they know themselves, and they can do that. Other people are a bit more novice and they necessarily don't want to get into that detail, and it wouldn't benefit them. Other people are maybe a little bit more novice and they want to get serious. And so that's where I might go through like a day, every hour by the day. What are you doing? What activity are you doing? what food are you eating, how much of each macro are you eating, and what are you eating? And then I can really dial into some specific stuff. They really want to get that detailed. But like you said, Dave, like it's not a big deal. It might be that small percentage that most people don't need. But if they want to dial that in, I'm more than happy to, because that's some of the stuff I find very interesting and like to do. But I don't necessarily think it's necessary. I really like the fact that with nutritional science, like there are overarching principles we have to abide by, but that just opens up so much flexibility for everyone. It's very much a case-by-case situation. And like Jacob rightly said, the psychology of people is huge. So there's very much getting awareness of, do they enjoy this diet? Like if they're often talking about it and like, I don't know, they're struggling with certain elements, it's just literally trying to help with them. And that's actually something I do with more people who are maybe a little bit more gen pop, like you said, Dave. Like sometimes they really don't know how much they are eating. And I've had consultations with people who are like, oh, I'm eating this tiny amount. I'm really, really struggling to lose weight. And I'm thinking, let's just start you on what I think is going to be probably a moderate deficit and roll with it. And then they're more precise because they're getting that accountability. They're getting that kind of adherence way up. So that really helps. But yeah, that's some of what we do.
Sure. And then even like you said, the psychology of it, for me, I was very glad to see I would say recent years, but it's almost like a decade now, just showing that the frequency isn't as important. I think we might have mentioned before, but like when I was in high school, it was like every 2 to 3 hours, like I would freak out if I wasn't getting some source of protein. And when I was in college, I decided that's when intermittent fasting was kind of brought up by Martin Berkhan. So I figured like I'd give it a shot, 3 meals in 8 hours. And I don't think intermittent fasting is anything magic, of course. But I will say that I gained just as much muscle in that year than I had in the previous year. And there were other factors too. I was working with a coach then, but the point was it obviously didn't like hinder me that much. I mean, I still put on quite a bit of strength and muscle in that year. And it just really allowed me to see that like you can do this and still live like a relatively normal life. You don't have to freak out about a half an hour here or even, anything like that. So the psychology of it is huge and making sure that you can actually incorporate this into your life.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you guys said. But one thing I will say is in the evidence-based community, people are exposed to information, such as we have a great degree of flexibility within meal timing and frequency if your goal is fat loss. And they'll read things such as, let lifestyle and preference dictate how you structure your day. Now, saying to someone, eat as many meals as you prefer and that fits your lifestyle is, in my opinion, really horrible advice for the most part, because if people are hiring a coach, they generally don't know what is best. They're looking for guidance and somebody to help them make decisions. Now, obviously, this isn't the case for a lot of the people that Steve works with. He mentioned that they're coaches and have a pretty good understanding of things. And this is where we need to understand, the importance of thinking about, these kind of nuances within diet along a spectrum, and not thinking categorically that, preference and lifestyle dictate just, whatever fits that's how you structure your diet. Rather, that's the broad strokes. That's, something that is true in the context of, fat loss, but how we apply that to certain situations needs to be, incremental, in that we shouldn't just completely give people autonomy over how they structure their day, because individuals who are beginners, who are just starting out, or even their personality and their reasons why they're hiring you might be such that they want guidance and they want tighter constraints on things because that's what they will adhere to best, because they don't want to make the decisions or they don't know how they make the decisions. And as somebody becomes more advanced and knows how to navigate a fat loss phase and has successfully lost weight before, they'll be able to structure their day based on preference and lifestyle because they understand what it takes to achieve the end goal, and they've done it before. And this is where, as somebody becomes more experienced, generally you can say things like eat based on preference and lifestyle because they want autonomy. Advanced athletes, love autonomy. They love taking the process and the decision making to be their own and have ownership over it. Whereas beginners and many intermediates, they need those tighter confines around the specifics of what they should and shouldn't do. And we see things like the pyramids where it's like meal timing and frequency is like way up the top, just below supplements, and then you have adherence at the bottom. It's like, well, did you ever think that meal timing and frequency could massively affect adherence? right? It's not always this bottoms up approach. Oh, just adherence, preference and lifestyle. It's like, yeah, well, unfortunately, meal timing frequency for a lot of people can be the difference between whether or not they adhere. And I think, again, in the evidence-based community, we see a lot of coaches who just, think of things in a vacuum. They think quite dogmatically, and, pyramids, it's like, well, that's more important than that, because it's at the bottom or it's lower down on the order of priorities. And fundamentally, that's true. But in many contexts, it's like these other, principles of nutrition and, ways to apply the overarching, goals of creating a calorie deficit are going to change in every circumstance. And I think, yeah, like helping your clients determine when and what they eat can be a massive factor in influencing behavior change. And for a lot of people, some guidance and recommendations about, cool, we need to eat less at this meal because that's when you typically overconsume calories, for example. Or, wow, okay, you're finding your workout performance is really crappy, so we need to focus on getting a meal in here so that you're not completely drained by the time you get into your second or third exercise in the gym. And these sorts of things, not only to uphold performance in the gym, but adherence to the diet. I've found that meal timing and frequency can be a game changer for a lot of people. And I know this because I was on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of my opinion on this variable now. When I was exposed to, Alan Aragon, Eric Helms, where it's like meal timing frequency, preference and lifestyle. That's what I used to tell people: eat between 3 to 6 meals, preference and lifestyle, like, whatever works for you. So, well, people hire a coach because they don't know what works for them, generally speaking. Like, they want other things such as accountability, motivation, and, somebody else to take care of some decisions. But in many cases, we can bolster adherence by giving people some confines. And as I said, when an athlete becomes more advanced, we simply, lower the constraints, give them more autonomy, and they can make the decisions for themselves because they have the knowledge, the experience, and the know-how to do so. But yeah, I think it's very context dependent in terms of how much emphasis we do place on meal timing and frequency in our recommendations to clients. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, because you're right. A lot of the people who come to us, they might even know what to do. I mean, how many advanced people that we see who go to coaches themselves, they know what to do, but they want somebody to be able to tell them and kind of like be in their corner. And certainly even more so for beginners. I mean, that's why they're hiring you. And I would never want to, overemphasize to a client, how important something is. I would still want to let them know and be aware that this is, maybe an individual thing. But I think even like if I look at my dad from years ago, we were going on vacation and I would give him general advice and the advice was sound. But it wasn't until he had this personal trainer who, to be honest, like I don't even think was a great trainer. He would tell him like these exercises were so important and everything, but he believed it. And it was somebody telling him this is what you do. And that made him more consistent, So it got him the results. And whether I agreed with it or not, it still got the results. And so I think, like I said, you certainly don't want to deceive people and make them think you have this magic tip or anything like that. But you're right. I mean, people do come to us for advice and they want to hear, how to go about it. And we talked a little bit about specific diet phases. Something that I think has really changed in the last few years is a couple decades ago now, people would just go a full contest prep without any, diet breaks, any cheat meals, anything like that. Back probably like 2005 to 10, cheat meals or cheat days actually became like really popular. Very common to just do, 8 to 10,000 calorie cheat days, just all out for one day. And then the damage control was like the next week. And now in the last couple of years, we're talking about full diet breaks. That was popularized a little bit by Lyle McDonald. And then we've had some other studies come out about that, where rather than some huge surplus for one day, you're taking maybe 5 to 7 days and just eating at maintenance. And the idea being that you don't put on a lot of fat, but you are, reestablishing normal hormone levels, satiety, all that. And so are you guys incorporating that now when you're having people getting really lean? Are you still just sticking with cheat meals? How are you going about it?
Should I start again?
Sure.
I just wanted to say on Jacob's points, I completely agree. I think fundamentally, I don't look at it as much because of the people I work with, but I think those are essential. And I think in addition to that, food sources, again, like people who are new they see macros and then it's the typical if it fits your macros approach. Whereas if you actually start with a kind of food composition approach, quite often they land within a good like deficit, for example, or something like that. So I think that's really important to know that it's more nuanced than a priority pyramid. There is kind of intertwining elements. So I think that's fantastically put. In terms of kind of nutrient, I guess, periodization in many ways, I do a very similar approach that Jacob does with long-term kind of looking at a kind of somewhat of a future plan. We're massing here, we were in a surplus here, deload, diet break within a calorie deficit, for example. Things like this is definitely something that we implement as well. And again, like Jacob said, individuals, if they're on holiday, if they're things like that, you can try and kind of drop in deloads in that period of time, or a diet break where it suits them. Same with like if they've got kind of a weekend where they're going to be out at a stag do or something, you put in a diet break or something along those lines. And it might be a stag do where they can't track then, so then you use kind of an intuitive approach. Or you might have someone who's going away and they're just going to London, where they might be able to track, and maybe they're in prep and they're like 15 weeks out, and you would get them to track. So it's just showing that there's so much intricacies and so many different ways depending on the individual to still get an outcome. But for me, yeah, it was always kind of, when I first got into coaching, refeeds were like, I was like, like a refeed just like a magic fat loss tool? Like you eat more and you lose more? I didn't really understand the physiology or the basics behind them at all. And I had utilized some of them with myself through a coach during my 2014 prep, but they weren't really very much used. And I don't think at that period of time in 2014, they were really like a big tool, and multiple day refeeds certainly weren't. And it's only in like maybe the last 2-3 years where diet breaks, longer kind of refeeding periods have become more popular and more used. And I have found personally, and I can't say the same is for everyone at Revive Stronger, because I know Pascal isn't as bigger on these, but I find diet breaks within cutting phases along with deloads work incredibly well. Kind of like a complete, you deload in terms of physiology from training, all of that fatigue that's built up, you get a real replenishment from that. And you get in a slight increase in calories. Obviously, expenditure is going to come down, so you need to kind of equate for that. But it might be like 300 extra calories that you get every single day. And you get a diet break, you get all the physiological kind of improvements that you see with that as well. It's an entire week off. And I find that implemented just keeps people really ticking along. It gets their training keeping high quality. And a lot of the people I work with they're kind of a little bit too much of an on and off switch, where we like the dimmer switch, but they really like, okay, I'm dieting. I don't want to have like, if I have a refeed at the end of the week, it's going to get out of control. I just prefer the linear approach with the diet break at the end with the deload. And it just seems to work really, really well for a lot of people. Sometimes I implement kind of multiple day refeeds, for example, like if they've got at like random occasions where they're away, or if they've got events, birthdays, parties, or whatever it might be. And also with just experimenting with some people. So sometimes with female clients where there has been kind of 3MJ and Eric Helms has talked about how kind of keeping periods around for a longer period of time has been helpful, having multiple day refeeds. Sometimes I experiment with that. I haven't necessarily seen fantastic results with that. So I do, for the most part, utilize a linear deficit deload diet break approach, and that seems to work really well for most of the people I work with. I don't know if I covered all of your questions there, but
I think so. Yeah.
The fat loss basis I go with.
Yeah. So go ahead, Jacob.
Sorry, man. Yeah, I think Steve's pretty much bang on the money. I think it's always good I mentioned this in the previous chat we had, I think, to understand like the origins of, strategies like this and where they come from. And refeeds was sort of an evolution from carb cycling, from what I have observed. And it has been a very interesting, I guess, transition in evidence-based practice, to see coaches go from just very linear dieting to carb cycling, and then obviously rapid backloading with carbs. Like there's always been this little bit of an obsession, and I guess an understanding that carbs at certain times can be very useful. And I think that's certainly the case in the context of fat loss. Now, I have principles that guide when I incorporate periods of maintenance, because essentially that's what a refeed and a diet break and maintenance periods are. And it's important to understand that the benefits are generally scaled with time, meaning that any physiological improvements, whether it's a temporal increase in leptin, or energy expenditure, mood, all these sorts of things, you see a greater effect size with longer durations of calorie maintenance. Now that's not to say that you'll restore all of these markers to baseline. You simply get a temporal increase based on where you're at now. So for example, if leptin was say at 100% when you're in the off season, and you've dieted down over the course of 16 weeks, you're not going to see your leptin levels return to that 100% output. You might just get a small increase in where you're currently at, which means you're still going to feel pretty average. But that aside, generally speaking, I use these tools primarily for adherence. Now, whether or not we need to use maintenance periods to improve compliance to the diet over the week is one thing. So, for example, in the context of many lifestyle or physique enthusiasts who go out on the weekends, whether it's to eat out for social reasons, or they just like eating more food on the weekend because they're in a different environment, they're not at work, they don't have the same structure and routine. That's definitely a case when I'll use refeed. So I typically will use a 5-2 approach, and that's how I like to set most people up in a fat loss phase. Is we'll have probably 1 or 2 maintenance days within the week. Now, the benefits of refeeds, like I said, are scaled with duration. They become more important the more that adherence becomes an issue. So in regards to refeeds, as somebody diets, the longer they diet, generally the more refeeds they'll have within the week. And the leaner they get, the hungrier they're going to get. So having more days at maintenance is probably a good idea because it also slows down the rate of loss, which means they're not going to lose muscle tissue, their performance won't suffer as much, and they have less fat to liberate, which is really important. So if you have somebody string together 7 low days when they're sub 10% body fat, that's going to hurt. And if you're not pressed for time, probably not a wise idea. So generally speaking, like I said, adherence is the primary reason I use them, but as somebody gets leaner and leaner, they will generally have more days within the microcycle at maintenance, depending on obviously the timeframes we have to get the job done. And same for diet breaks. I think they're a great tool to mitigate a lot of the fatigue associated with dieting, like Steve said. I generally plug them in line with a deload, as does Steve. But I like to have roving diet breaks. So I'll plan them in, but if somebody reaches their target, weight for that specific phase early, I'll bring that maintenance period forward. Regardless of what week, it falls on within their training cycle. And in terms of maintenance phases, I generally structure my maintenance phases in a way that it comes after a very slow rate of loss. So I actually use reverse dieting within my fat loss phases. So if I plan out somebody's 4-month dieting phase, for example, 20 weeks, they will have 10 weeks where they're at a pretty aggressive or moderate deficit where we try to get the most amount of fat off because they have more fat to liberate, so their rate of loss can be greater. They're not going to be fatigued if they're coming from a maintenance phase or off season or a calorie surplus, and they're going to be motivated, all that sort of stuff. And getting some good results and some fast weight loss initially is extremely motivating, which again improves adherence down the track. And then after that 10 weeks, what I generally do, like I said, within my diet periodization model, is I'll slow down the rate of loss. So reverse dieting, which is nothing magic, but I gradually increase calories to slow down the rate of loss, and I will do that in a number of ways. It could be across the week. It could be by adding a high day, like I mentioned earlier. If they've got a 5-2 structure, within the week, I might increase calories, by 10% on their low days, but add in an extra maintenance day. So they've got 4 low days, I'd say a 10% deficit, and then 3 high days. And then we'll get that rate of loss slower and slower until we find their maintenance calories. We just keep bringing up their calories to the end of the 20 weeks and almost see how much food this person can eat to maintain their body weight. And when we find that sweet spot, we'll then run 2 to 6 weeks of maintenance. And then depending on what they're doing after that phase, we'll transition to either the off season gaining phase, back into a diet where we have a moderate rate of loss now, because generally they'll be leaner, so that we're not going to go straight back into a faster rate of loss, all those sorts of things. So yeah, I guess I have a very it seems complex, but it's really not. But it is a little bit more intricate in terms of I vary the intake across the weeks and months, depending on the objective of the phase. And I use things like refeeds and diet breaks to, improve adherence, keep performance high, and, whether we get some physiological benefits, that's, still up for debate. But I have seen with refeeds for females, man, you can get a hell of a lot of water weight off, just by reducing stress. Even things like, I had a girl once, actually, here's a really cool piece of anecdote. She lost 6 kilos of water weight in over her 3-day refeed. 6 kilos, and she only weighed 65 kilos. So she went from 65 to 59, which is like, I think it was like a 9 or 10% body weight reduction in water weight over 3 days. Now, she was in contest prep, and little things like, okay, you're having a refeed on the Sunday, and I encouraged her, I said, I want you to go out for a meal with your family so that you just don't have the stress of having to prepare your food. And that's just, one thing that you can just have someone cook a meal for you, and you don't have to, have that pressure. And it's just nice to, have someone cook for you, right? And I said, gave her some pretty strict instructions. I said, I want you to have, just 2 slices of bread, a couple of eggs, and a few, vegetables on the side. I said, nothing silly, factor it into your overall calories for the day, but just go and enjoy that meal. Have a normal coffee instead of a black coffee. And like I said, it was just by having the refeeds an opportunity for her to increase her food intake, potentially go out and have a meal, which in the contest prep for most people is like, wow, you can't do that. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, if you're having a refeed, you're trying to get to maintenance, whether you're slightly over or under, it's not really going to make a big deal. But if you can improve adherence and just have somebody stress a little bit less, you can get rid of some serious water weight. And I've definitely seen that with my males as well. Had a young man who's just in his contest prep now, 6 weeks. We're doing the diet before the diet. He dieted down for 6 weeks, lost 8 kilos, brought his calories up to maintenance, over a 3-day period last week. And he's like, oh man, are you sure? He's like, I'm not ready yet. I'm like, I know you're not ready yet. You're freaking like 8 months out, man. Chill. Just eat the food. And he went from an average of 80.5, and now he's hit 79.2 this week, after those high days. And it's not fat. He's just dropped some water. And I think there is some potential, stress mediating benefits with, having high days. Again, there's nothing in the literature to really support this, but, my anecdote at this stage is that refeeds are just beneficial from an adherence standpoint. There's potential reduction in water weight due to stress. But there are also drawbacks to refeeds as well. If you're always bringing people's food up, they can, yes, sustain the diet during the week, and it's like dangling the carrot at the end of the week for them, which can increase food focus on the weekend. They start, you give them an extra 100 grams of carbs, and all of a sudden they just want to eat ice cream and stuff like that. It can heighten food focus and all these sorts of things. So it's not to say that they're without their trade-offs, because there's certainly many in introducing refeeds, especially when somebody's hungry and been dieting for a long period of time and lower body fat percentages. But I do see their utility, and I think that's where as coaches we just have to be super cognizant of the person that we're working with, what's going to work best for them, and really just take into account not just these potential physical benefits, but also the psychological stuff.
Did that woman have edema before she did that refeed? Do you know? 'Cause that's a pretty massive amount of water.
Yeah, I can't confirm whether or not she had edema. She didn't complain about any like joint soreness or like swelling or anything like that. But yeah, man, like we'd been pushing the diet hard for a while. Her calories were down to, the 1,300, like it was pretty nasty, doing, it's about 13,000 steps a day from memory. So yeah, like she was, in the thick of it. But yeah, it's like women can hold a stupendous amount of water, man. Like she wasn't
crazy.
like stupidly lean at that point. So, she could have definitely been holding more water than somebody who is, say, at the very low ends of, what they can achieve in terms of their body fat.
Yeah, I think the term that Lyle McDonald coined a couple of years ago was long-term delayed. Yeah, whoosh, long-term delayed fat loss effect. He wrote an article on. And this is something that I had noticed years before I had seen his article on it. And, I don't know if it's actually a delayed fat loss effect. I think it's largely shifts in water. But anytime I would diet down and once I would ease up, my favorite time after, like throughout the year, was like the month after dieting, because you would still lose like a pound or two of water. you're able to increase calories, like you're able to enjoy the food, and it was like a great period. But always, a couple pounds I would lose, even when the calories would go up significantly. But you talked about the hormone changes, and just one anecdote of my own is after my last pretty severe diet, I dieted for probably close to 6 months. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to get a lot of blood work done just out of curiosity to see how things change. And my free T3 did not recover for close to 3 to 4 months. Even going back to significant calories, having gained like 10 to 15 pounds, it took months and months to go back. So I do think there are some hormonal benefits to doing refeeds, but they are transient. It's not going to really ever get back to normal until you are done dieting for a while. And another word of caution, you touched on it at the end there with refeeds, is I don't generally recommend like cheat days. Like I said, they used to be really popular. First, like you said, carb cycling was really popular. And then I don't know if you guys are familiar with skip loading. The idea behind that was just like these really low fat, high carb, like cereals, things like that, just like as much as you could. And then a lot of people just do all out cheat days. And that same coach I worked with in college, he had brought up the idea of having one cheat day every week to me. And for that time, like I had not had a cheat day in like forever, like years and years. I didn't want to. I was just kind of worried about it. So I gave it a shot. And what happened was he had me do it during the off season too. And it was okay. It was like fine during the off season. Basically, I would eat way less during the week, and then I would eat a ton on weekend. I don't think it's the best approach, even from a health standpoint. But what happened was, as I dieted, the leaner and leaner I got, the more obsessed I became with that cheat day. And I mean, it would literally be like a Sunday cheat day, and by Wednesday, it was just all that was on my mind, because you just know you're going to eat all this food. And then the worst thing I think is when people will do, okay, I'll have a cheat day every time I lose X amount of weight, because then what you end up doing is you end up starving yourself to get to your next cheat day even sooner. And I've seen people do that. Once I lose a pound, I have another cheat day. It can really mess you up psychologically and really give you a bad relationship with food. So I would definitely caution people against that. And like I said, I do like the diet breaks more. I think they provide benefits hormonally, metabolically, but at the end of the day, it's still like we said, once you're done dieting, that's when things will come back. But until then, you're going to have these negative changes, and it's just about, accommodating until you can get finished with the diet.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say on diet breaks, it's really, Jacob's anecdote of the 6 kilos, first of all, is insane. I wonder if that was in line. I don't know if actually, was she on her period? Was she having a period at that time? I wonder if it was in line with that.
I can't remember. It definitely would have. There would have been some like hormonal factors.
That would have been crazy.
Related to the menstrual cycle, progesterone, estrogen balances that would have contributed for sure, because it was pretty like crazy.
But yeah, I was just going to say, with diet breaks, I always have to emphasize that it isn't. It sounds. I actually said it to a client because they're going through one. I was like, it's not a diet break as such. It's more like a deficit break. Treat it as a deficit break, because a lot of people hear diet break and they're like, oh yeah, it's just a free week to not do anything. But all of us are referring to more so that deficit break, which I think is important. And then in terms of that, because I've done it with loads of different people. In the long run, they're successful, but in the short term, I can never actually predict until we've done a few. Some people gain weight, some people lose weight, some people maintain. It's really not always the same.
I totally agree with what Steve said. The perception around diet breaks, generally for most people, it is one that is filled with, cool, I'm no longer dieting. It's a break from dieting. So therefore, my current structures and systems, behaviors around my diet can change because I now have a break. And I think this is hugely problematic and something that I don't think gets emphasized enough. I'm sure many coaches do this, but, as Steve was saying, but, something I do with anyone who's having a refeed or a diet break is, again, I will give them some pretty clear instructions as to how best approach it. So not introduce a bunch of new foods if you're a couple of weeks out from a show, for example. Don't just change the composition and structure of all of your meals, perhaps just increase your portion sizes, so that there isn't this on and off switch like Steve referred to earlier. It's more of a dimmer switch. We're just turning, the food up. We're turning the amount of food you're consuming up. We might turn down some of the constraints around your diet. For example, on your diet break, you might only track, protein and calories. If you're in a contest prep, you're probably, going to be tracking everything. But, for most people, if they're just in a general fat loss phase, you might even, dim down the amount of restraint to protein and calories. You might dim down, restraint in terms of how, what foods they're measuring. They might only measure and weigh, very energy dense foods. They might not measure their vegetables, their fruits and things like that, track them into their calories, but just estimate, just give them a, psychological break. If it's somebody who's really overweight and they're having a diet break, you might even phase that diet break over the course of, say, 4 to 6 weeks, where they're just tracking protein and calories at the start. Then you might just get them tracking calories. Then you could get them tracking, Monday to Friday, they're just, eating habitually, based on all the, habits that they've developed over the course of a month. And then on the weekend, if they're eating out a little bit less structured, they might actually track their calories and macros, things like that. And then you might have a week after that where it's like, cool, let's just try to run 7 days, keep to these habits where you're just, eating, a certain number of meals with protein, certain number of meals with veggies and fruits, and trying to, control your portions. And I think that in this context, it's very useful to think about diet breaks as a way to teach people how to eat long term, for their lifestyle, if they're not serious physique competitors, or in a contest prep and things like this, because we are afforded more calories. There's no specific objective where it's like, well, we have to lose weight and we have to gain weight, which is really beneficial because people really struggle with the idea of not making progress. But this is an opportunity, in my opinion, to make progress in terms of their ability to eat, free from the numbers, essentially. So, I think, yeah, it's really cool and interesting to talk about diet breaks and maintenance phases, refeeds in the context of how do we optimize physiology to get someone as lean as possible. But I also think if we, think more globally about what we can achieve, when we have somebody learn to maintain their weight, for long-term body weight management, they're super useful, and we can be as creative as we can, to teach people how to maintain their weight, and eat habitually, without relying on a diet or specific recommendations. And I think that these longer periods of maintenance are a really cool opportunity to do that.
All right, so that is part 1 of the roundtable. We get started right off of that point in part 2. So go check out Jacob's channel to get started there.